Tantor Audio presents Uncovering Happiness, Overcoming Depression with Mindfulness and Self-Compassion by Elisha Goldstein, Ph.D. Narrated by Eric Michael Summerer. You may not control all the events that happen to you, but you can decide not to be reduced by them. Maya Angelou, Letter to My Daughter. Introduction. Mahatma Gandhi, the famed leader of India's non-violent independence movement, once described depression as a dryness of the heart that sometimes made him want to run away from the world. The Dalai Lama referred to it as the thoughts and emotions that undermine the experience of inner peace. Writer John Keats told of the hopelessness that depression created in his soul. If I were underwater, I would scarcely kick to come to the top. Every part of the mind and body can feel the weight of depression. It hijacks thoughts and feelings, influences behavior and choices, eats away at physical and mental health. It can be a serious medical illness that steals happiness and overshadows sufferers with darkness. It touches all of us, either directly or indirectly. Each year, 25 million Americans have an episode of major depression. Many have experienced it before and will again in the future. Depression has many faces. Some depressed people function relatively normally throughout their lives, despite ever-present, low-grade feelings of chronic unhappiness. Others become incapacitated with rolling bouts of self-loathing thoughts and murky mazes of negative feelings that clog the mind. Many discover that activities that once felt playful, pleasurable, or satisfying now bring no happiness and are difficult to do. The ability to control thoughts and actions seems lost. You may have experienced depression in the past, or you may be depressed right now. Perhaps you have felt its spirit-sapping symptoms: difficulty concentrating, lack of motivation, boredom, fatigue, anxiety, insomnia, irritability, guilt, feelings of worthlessness, emptiness, and sadness, and the incessant nagging of automatic negative thoughts, and have even considered suicide. What's the point of living, you may ask? No one can help me. Nothing's ever going to change. You may feel so full of despair that, like Keats, you would scarcely kick to come up from underwater. Your feelings are very real. When you are depressed, you feel hopeless. But that doesn't mean your situation is hopeless. Here's the thing about depression. It tells you lies. It makes you believe that thoughts are facts. It can even take away every last ounce of hope in your soul. In the following chapters, I'll show you why there is so much reason to feel optimistic. I'll explain how huge advances in mindfulness, neuroscience, and extensive studies of the depressed brain have brought about major breakthroughs in what we know about depression's triggers and treatments. I'll show you how you can use a variety of straightforward tools and techniques to break depression's hold on you and begin to uncover the happiness that is the essential core of who you truly are. There is hope. You can feel better. By following the steps in this book, you can take back control of your mind, your mood, and your life. Your brain's own natural antidepressant power. When you hear the word antidepressant, you probably think of a pill, a medication used to treat your illness. Medications are one kind of antidepressant, but they're not the only kind. Science is now showing that we also have natural antidepressants within our brains. Natural antidepressants are mindful mindsets, thoughts, and behaviors that build us up instead of tear us down, and allow us to help ourselves improve our own moods. These natural antidepressants can be gathered into 5 main categories. 1. Mindfulness. A flexible and unbiased state of mind where you are open and curious about what is present, have perspective, and are aware of choices. 2. Self-compassion. A state of mind where you understand your own suffering and use mindfulness, kindness, and loving openness to hold it non-judgmentally and consider it part of the human condition. 3. Purpose. A state of mind where you are actively engaged in living alongside your values, are inclined toward compassion for others, and possess an understanding of how your existence contributes value to the world. 4. Play. A flexible state of mind in which you are presently engaged in some freely chosen and potentially purposeless activity that you find interesting, enjoyable, and satisfying. 5. Mastery. A state of mind where you feel a sense of personal control and confidence, and are engaged in learning to get better and better at something that matters. By developing these 5 natural antidepressant fundamentals, which I will show you how to do step by step, you can strengthen your brain's ability to act as its own antidepressant that can be as powerful as, or even more powerful than, the antidepressant medications. Because you are alive, anything is possible. Thich Nhat Hanh, Vietnamese Zen Buddhist monk and teacher. A note about antidepressant medications. I recognize the value of antidepressant medications, and I believe they can play an important role in the treatment of clinical depression. I've seen pharmaceuticals be lifesavers for some depressed patients, giving them the help they need to engage in necessary psychological treatment. However, I also believe these drugs are heavily overprescribed and overused. For many patients, antidepressants cause more harm than good. They can create a cascade of mental health problems that go far beyond the depression they were prescribed to treat. Too many people get caught in the trap of jumping from one drug to the next, or taking multiple prescriptions in order to offset serious side effects caused by individual drugs. As I see it, the problem with current pharmaceutical treatments is that they haven't caught up with recent discoveries in neuroscience. A growing number of healthcare professionals are starting to integrate current science in the decision-making process when treating depression. They are beginning to look at the illness in a science-based, whole-person approach. But still, too many patients, healthcare providers, researchers, medical organizations, and government-funded agencies rely on outdated information to make decisions and recommendations about the use of antidepressant medications. They operate from the decades-old assumption that mental health can be restored to people with depression only by using drugs to balance the chemicals in their brains. That assumption is no longer accurate. In recent years, research that you'll soon learn about has revealed so much about natural antidepressants, mindfulness, cognitive behavioral therapy, and other non-drug approaches to treating depression and promoting long-term healing. Antidepressant medications are still a useful tool for treating depression, but they're not the only tool, and in many cases, they're not the most effective tool. It's important to be informed about medication and make the decision to integrate them or taper off of them as part of your treatment in conjunction with your doctor. Whether you are on antidepressants and they're working for you, you're on them and want to get off of them, or you are not on antidepressants at all, the work that you do through this book is going to support your ability to get better at overcoming the depressive cycles. The stats on antidepressant medications. About 11% of Americans over the age of 12 take antidepressant medication. More than 60% of Americans taking antidepressant medication have taken it for 2 years or longer. 14% have taken it for 10 years or more. Antidepressants are the 3rd most common prescription drug used by Americans of all ages. In the past 25 years, the rate of antidepressant use in the United States has increased nearly 400%. A mindfulness approach. Mindfulness is the foundation on which everything in uncovering happiness is built. Put quite simply, mindfulness is awareness. It is the action of intentionally using your 5 senses to bring complete attention to your experience of the present moment, while letting go of judgments and biases. Although it is rooted in Buddhism, the practice of mindfulness has undergone extensive scientific study in the West and has been shown to be a powerful, effective way of eliciting psychological wellness. It has been used with great success to help people with depression, anxiety, stress-related disorders, chronic pain, addictive behavior, and even chronic stress. Mindfulness is one of the ways that we can take advantage of the brain's plasticity in order to strengthen our emotional resilience. In recent years, psychology researchers have found the practice of mindfulness to be particularly helpful in reducing the risk of relapse in people who have experienced depression. Many studies have found it to be a significant alternative to or support for medication. Mindfulness works by interrupting the conditioned cycle of thoughts, emotions, sensations, and behavior that mire people in a downward spiral of depression. Using mindfulness allows us to transform our harsh inner critics to voices of support by increasing the capacity for self-compassion that nurtures self-worth and resiliency. A self-compassion approach. While mindfulness is the foundation for uncovering happiness, mindfulness on its own is often not enough. The other foundation on which this program rests is self-compassion, the recognition of our own suffering with an inclination to help ourselves. Once we become aware that we're struggling, self-compassion allows us to activate the brain's self-soothing system. This inspires a sense of safety and courage to engage in the behavioral changes necessary to move toward healing. As humans, we're wired with an automatic negativity bias, paying more attention to what's negative than positive. This wiring is for survival. If danger is lurking, we want to have a quick response system to keep us safe. The problem is that this same negativity bias turns inward, and we can be too hard on ourselves. With depression, these voices really dig in, striking where we're most vulnerable and evoking feelings of shame, inadequacy, and unworthiness. The cultural stigma of depression as a weakness only feeds these feelings. Part of self-compassion is to recognize that we're not alone with this. It's not something to be ashamed of, and that emotional struggles are a part of the human condition. Science is now revealing that self-compassion is a key transformative and protective mindset for decreasing anxious and depressive symptoms. The alchemy of mindfulness and self-compassion transforms vulnerability so that instead of it being something we fear will spiral us down, it becomes an upward spiral of self-worth and resiliency. It may seem difficult to do, but it's a skill that anyone can learn. Think of this book as your compassionate guide. Even after you've listened to it, it will remain with you, ready to help guide you through the ups and downs that are part of this unfolding life. Based in science. The techniques, tools, and strategies in this book are grounded in a wealth of exciting new scientific knowledge. For decades, psychological treatment was based on observations about people's behaviors, choices, thoughts, and explanations. But the development of technological resources, such as functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI, has opened windows into the human mind, allowing neurological researchers to understand brain function in amazing new ways that have never been possible before. Using advanced scientific technology, researchers have discovered, for example, that by using certain cognitive and mind-body techniques, we actually have the ability to change our brains. This is called neuroplasticity. Until about the 1970s, scientists believed that once the brain finished undergoing the growth and development of childhood, its structure, pathways, and connections were pretty much set in stone. But researchers began to challenge that assumption, and they designed studies to test it. I'll tell you about some of the fascinating ones later in the book. Soon, the idea of the static brain was replaced by the belief in the plasticity of the brain. Science was showing that the brain can actually be rewired through the actions of neural processes, behaviors, and the environment. This was amazing news for people with depression, anxiety, and other emotional health problems because it demonstrated the potential for the parts of the brain associated with emotions to be made more resilient. We now know, for example, that we can actually grow new nerve connections and activate areas of the brain associated with awareness, learning, memory, and empathy. We can strengthen the parts of the brain associated with resiliency just as we can strengthen the muscles in our bodies. What's more, we can actually deactivate areas of the brain that rev up when we experience the automatic negative thoughts that fuel depression. What it all comes down to is this: we can build up the sections of the brain that protect us from depression and slow down the sections that foster depression. Doing this allows the brain's own natural antidepressants to emerge, grow stronger, and contributes powerfully to the resiliency that we need to enjoy good times, survive difficult times, and open us up to lives that truly feel worth living. Unlearning helplessness. This book also addresses another crucial area to overcoming depression: unlearning the learned helplessness that influences the behavior of so many people with depression. Learned helplessness is a mental state in which we are unable or unwilling to solve a problem even when there is a viable solution within reach. It occurs when our brains come to the conclusion that we don't have control over problematic situations. Being depressed induces a sense of learned helplessness that can surface again in the future when depression reoccurs. Learned helplessness teaches us to stop trying to help ourselves even when we are actually capable of it, and it prevents us from learning new strategies to prevent relapse even when those strategies exist. It is another lie that depression forces us to believe. Yet, just as helplessness can be learned, it can be unlearned. We can begin replacing learned helplessness with learned helpfulness. Science shows that we can actually grow new neural connections in areas of the brain that process emotional pain, empowering us to recognize our own helplessness and replace it with more constructive thinking and self-helpful behavior. Once we identify and understand the helplessness habits we fall into during periods of depression, we can challenge and change them, replacing them with new behaviors of helpfulness that allow us to solve problems and pull ourselves away from depression. By unlearning learned helplessness, we can unearth the inner strength we need to make choices that lead us out of the self-perpetuating loop of helplessness and depression. The format of Uncovering Happiness. The following chapters integrate the findings of hundreds of academic studies and dozens of interviews with mindfulness teachers, psychologists, neuroscientists, and researchers. It also includes stories from some of the people I've worked with who have suffered the burden of depression and who have used the techniques in this book to find their own personal pathways to healing. All of these stories are shared with permission, and pseudonyms have been used to protect each person's privacy. Uncovering Happiness has 3 parts. In Part 1, I'll lay out the groundwork for cultivating what I call an antidepressant brain. We'll cover the following topics and more: what depression is and why it happens, what the depression loop is, how it works, and how we can interrupt it, why having depression once or twice or even repeatedly for years does not mean you are destined to face a future of chronic depression, how subconscious conditioning feeds depression, why depression is not your fault, how to break the habits that contribute to and sustain depression, how a transformative method is changing the way we think about human potential, and how to stop one very specific force from allowing us to fall into depression again and again. In Part 2, we'll look at the 5 essential natural antidepressants: mindfulness, self-compassion, purpose, play, and mastery. I'll explain what these are, how they can protect you from depression, how they inspire real happiness, and how to develop them in your life. Part 3, the Natural Antidepressant Toolkit, is a fantastic resource that will give you an array of tools, techniques, and practices to support you throughout your journey. Here you'll find guidance on creating your own antidepressant cheat sheets, forming your own get-well team, building healthy habits that you can stick to for the rest of your life, and becoming part of a supportive mindfulness community. Where I'm coming from. Mindfulness changed my life. In fact, it may have even saved it. Looking back, I can trace my ups and downs with depression to as early as childhood. In youth, Depression can often show up as anger, and my family would describe me during those years as defiant, willful, and angry. Imagine a chubby, freckle-faced kid with a frown and his arms crossed over his chest. That was me. My parents divorced when I was 6 years old, and I grew up searching for ways to ease the feelings of loneliness and emotional pain. During high school, I started experimenting with alcohol and marijuana as an escape, and in college I discovered psychedelics and amphetamines. The drugs helped me get away from the internal experience of loneliness and grief that had resided within me since childhood. While living in San Francisco during my 20s, I built a successful career in sales. Yet at night, I lived fast and partied recklessly, abusing drugs and alcohol with a like-minded group of drifting souls. Eventually, my despair and shame grew so deep that I isolated myself from my family and friends, and lost myself in my addictive behaviors. Occasionally, in some of the seedier bars I frequented, I would come across a mess of a man who was so strung out that he repulsed me. I remember saying to my friends, "God help me if I ever turn out like him." I thought, since I was managing to succeed at work, I was in control of my self-abusive behavior. But one night, after many hours of partying, I saw the truth of who I had become. When I found myself slumped beside that man and his equally dazed companion in the back of a broken-down limousine, I saw my own reflection in his wasted face and realized I was throwing away my life. I jumped out of the limousine, determined to transform myself. It wasn't easy, and I admit that I hit a few bumps as I set out to start my life over. My family urged me to spend a month away at a retreat center. During that time, I questioned everything I did and all that I believed. Answers began to come to me as I started to practice mindfulness. I wanted to stop abusing my body. I wanted to find the purpose and meaning of my life. I wanted to be happy. I wanted to heal myself, and eventually, I realized, I wanted to help heal others who faced some of the same challenges that had nearly broken me. I went back to school and entered into a playful adventure with mindfulness. I focused on living a more purposeful life, surrounding myself with supportive people and replacing destructive behaviors with healthy choices that fulfilled me. I started to create a life of meaning and purpose that allowed me to feel whole. I was starting to uncover happiness. After finishing my training as a clinical psychologist, I began running mindfulness-based stress reduction, MBSR, and mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, MBCT, programs, focusing on helping people relate to stress better and not relapse into depression. During the years that followed, I saw how effectively mindfulness-based therapies helped people reduce stress and heal emotionally. I began training therapists, physicians, educators, and business people in the combination of mindfulness and mental health. I went on to co-author a mindfulness-based stress reduction workbook and authored The Now Effect and Mindfulness Meditations for the Anxious Traveler. I designed programs to reach a variety of different people, including mindfulness at work for corporations, mindful compassion cognitive therapy, MCCT, for depressive relapse, and co-designed the Calm, Connecting Adolescents to Learning Mindfulness program with my wife, Dr. Stephanie Goldstein. As I continued with my own practice and learned from the practice of my clients and students, I discovered powerful essential antidepressant elements that had never before been explicitly integrated into the current mindfulness-based therapies for people with depression. Throughout this journey, I've gone through profound shifts in how I relate to myself and the world. I've learned that I don't have to be enslaved by the story of the past, and I certainly don't need to believe everything I think. I have a deep sense that I am worthy of love, and that often comes through my own courage in being vulnerable with myself and others. I don't get caught as often in the trap of, what will people think? But side more with the belief that I am doing the best I can at the moment, and I am enough. I have also noticed that life has its ups and downs, and I can't control the conditions that happen to me in any given moment, but I can choose, with awareness, how to respond to them. I now know that uncovering happiness is not about simply being drunk on life, but is found in a profound and enduring experience of learning how to lean into loving ourselves and others in good times and in bad. It's a happiness based on a sense of common humanity, connectedness, and purpose. I notice feeling more loving and peaceful with myself and others, not all the time, but much more than before. While I still get hooked at times by self-judgments and negative thoughts, I have learned to be grateful for the good moments and a bit more graceful during the difficult ones, knowing that all things in life come and go. The guidance in this book is not a miraculous panacea. It can't cure depression overnight, and each step does take effort to implement into your life. I can't promise you that listening to Uncovering Happiness will make all of your depressive symptoms disappear instantly. But I can promise that the guidelines within these chapters will give you the tools you need to begin to break the cycle of depression and release yourself from its grip. Whatever your experience with depression has been, whether you just have the blues, you have chronic low-grade unhappiness, or you've experienced one or more major depressive episodes, you have the power to change the way you feel. By understanding how depression works and making the choice to nurture your natural antidepressants, you can become stronger and more resilient. Trust yourself. You can cultivate an antidepressant brain and uncover happiness. If you're not completely convinced that you can take steps to help yourself feel better, try putting aside that judgment. That's your depression talking. Try your best to ignore those doubts for now and take a leap of faith. Soon the experience of truth will begin to crowd out the lies of depression. Ready? Let's get started. Part 1. A naturally antidepressant brain. Step 1. Understand the depression loop. Clint, a middle-aged executive, had experienced bouts of anxiety and depression off and on since childhood. Raised by an overly critical father, Clint grew up believing that having negative emotions was a sign of weakness, so he buried them deep inside. When Clint was a child, his father would call him a sissy and embarrass him in public when he cried. Later in life, when Clint felt sadness or other difficult emotions, he would close himself down and become numb, avoiding his partner and burying himself in work to try to hide from his feelings. Clint didn't realize it at the time, but he was caught in a depression loop. Complicated feelings, such as sadness, would trigger reactionary thoughts, negative self-talk, and sensations, emotional numbness, that would in turn cue certain behaviors, withdrawal from loved ones and escape to his computer and his work. Anxiety and hopelessness left Clint feeling pessimistic that he'd ever emerge from his depression, creating a negative feedback loop that made him feel trapped. Working together, Clint and I focused on understanding the cyclical nature of his responses to his feelings. Clint began to see and recognize his own personal depression cues. He began to learn to step outside of his habitual mindsets when uncomfortable feelings emerged in order to take a closer look at those feelings and the reactions they elicited. He identified triggers, thought patterns, and behaviors that were associated with his depressive experiences. Clint had a breakthrough experience one morning. After hearing some bad family news, he paid attention to his reactions and noticed himself becoming numb and withdrawn. He felt an urge to head to his computer to work, as he had so often before. He saw himself trying to flee from his sadness instead of allowing himself to feel it. This time, though, things were different. Because he had learned how to recognize the activation of his familiar depressive loop, he was more aware and able to interrupt it. He was able to make the choice to step out of the cycle and let himself feel sad rather than hiding from the feeling. As he gave himself permission to experience an uncomfortable emotion, the tension in his body dissipated, and within a half hour, the sadness passed. Clint felt elevated by a sense of freedom he hadn't experienced in quite some time. By recognizing his own personal depressive stimulus, Clint was able to change his response and avoid a negative spiral that would lead him down the path of negative feelings, thoughts.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?